Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. On July 3rd, the Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi was removed from office following massive street protests. Since then, his supporters have been rallying across the country, demanding that he's reinstated. More than 250 people have been killed in the ensuing violence. Meanwhile, the interim authorities are carrying on with the political process without the Islamists, leaving a country bitterly divided. I'm here at the Egyptian Foreign Ministry with the Interim Foreign Minister, Mr. Nabil Fahmy. Mr. Fahmy, thank you very much for joining us today on France 24. Now, you've previously said that the army had no option but to remove Mohamed Morsi from power. So how do you explain to the international community that what happened wasn't a military coup?
Very easily and very confidently. Coup normally entails the army taking the initiative, removing a president, and governing the country. In this case, the army did not take the initiative. It responded to the people exactly the same way it responded 2.5 years earlier to the January 25th revolution. It did remove the president in response to the people, but did not govern the country. It handed over the country immediately, according to our constitutional precedents, that in the absence of a parliament, the head of our constitutional court becomes the interim president. So they responded to the people because their only option was either respond before there's violence and chaos, or respond to prevent violence and chaos. And then they immediately handed over power to the interim president, Mr. Judge Adli Mansour, and in consultation with the interim president, with the different political stakeholders, a roadmap was laid out which included a new government in Egypt, the beginning of drafting of a constitution, that's already started, beginning of a reconciliation commission, that's already started, and 2 dates for elections for parliament and then president, starting a few weeks after the constitution is finished. So we should have all the components of the democratic institutions finished within 7 months, but within a maximum of 9 months.
But surely,
in the absence of the army initiating the act or governing after the act, I don't consider it to be a coup.
But surely that sets some kind of a precedent. I mean, if whoever is elected in those forthcoming presidential elections, the people take against him, then they could just go out into the streets again, and you're in this cycle of protest and deposing the president who's been elected.
Not at all. Not at all. First of all, if anybody can bring out 20 to 25 million people out in the street, then the president obviously has a problem. That would be the equivalent of 40 million people going out in Great Britain, something similar in France, and the governments would topple in both of those countries if that was the case. Because politicians would not ignore the public. And I would take you back to President de Gaulle, when he made a referendum and he didn't get the numbers that he wanted, and he resigned. These were exceptional circumstances, but it does not set a simple precedent that every time you're angry, the army comes in. Don't belittle the numbers that came out, the anger of the people. They were angry because the former president was governing exclusively. He wanted to govern Egypt only in one face, that of the Islamists. Egypt is a pluralistic society. It has Islamists, and they should be part of the future. But it is neither only secularists or only Islamists. And it will not be either of them.
Now, the US have said that the Egyptian military's crackdown on demonstrators sets back the process of democracy. I mean, what do you say to that, and who do you blame for this violence that we've seen over the past month?
Primarily the demonstrators, and there's always a reaction to that. And the reason I say this is, if you look at the demonstrations that were held by those supporting the government, not opposing, those supporting the government, there's been very little violence in any of those between them and the constituency around them, or between them and the authorities. The opposite is true, however, where demonstrations occurred from the Islamists, frequently you've seen violence. And it's not between them and only the security forces, it's also between them and the constituencies living in different parts of town. I'm calling on the end of violence by everybody. We need to diffuse the situation and get into a rational discussion, a dispassionate discussion, to bring everybody into the process. But it's not going to be as a result of somebody throwing a Molotov cocktail or somebody being killed here or there. Any loss of life is regrettable, irrespective of the political inclination of that person. But if you want to have a democratic system, an active political system, which we have not had for years, people have to resort to the power of persuasion, not the power of the gun.
So are there any negotiations currently underway? We've had the EU diplomat Catherine Ashton in town. She's been listening to both sides, she's saying, but not mediating. Is there anybody mediating? What's happening with negotiations?
I wouldn't define any of the processes now that there is a structured mediation. I think many different individuals are trying to come up with initiatives. Some are trying to engage the different sides. But any of the efforts to be successful, they have to be based on there's no turning back. The discussion is about how do we build the future, not how to reconstruct the past. That's not going to happen. We need to build a future that is legally based, non-violent, completely inclusive for all components of our society that respect the rule of law and are non-violent, irrespective of their point of view. We need to develop a constitution where every Egyptian finds his place. There's a big difference between winning an election and feeling marginalized because we didn't have a true constitution, and having a constitution which sets the checks and balances for the winner of the election, that he may have won a majority. He or she can pursue their programs, but they cannot go beyond those parameters that are inclusive for the majority and the minority. That's the essence of democracy. Everybody finding their place. It's about inclusiveness. It's not only about the ballot box. The ballot box is a tool of democracy. It is not the essence of democracy.
So how can you bring back the Muslim Brotherhood and the people out supporting Mohamed Morsi? How are you going to bring them into the political fold?
Ending violence, continuing to engage them, slowly showing them that as they engage, they can participate in defining the constitution with the issues that are of concern to them. They can participate in defining the election laws, issues that will define how the election process moves forward. I think the only way to move forward is to emphasize there's no moving back, to emphasize that violence has to stop, and to, on that basis, look at solutions that will diffuse once you diffuse the security tensions, you can then try to diffuse the political tensions and ensure inclusiveness.
So we keep hearing from the interim authorities that you're fighting a war on terror. I mean, what exactly do you mean by that? Is that not just a cover for a crackdown on the Islamists, especially the Muslim Brotherhood?
Give you an example. Well, first of all, the answer is no. It's not just anybody who has been looking at the situation in Egypt for the last 5 years has, at different points in time, emphasized there's a problem in the Sinai. With the breakdown with the developments in Libya, you saw also a influx of weapons into Egypt beyond any numbers that we had in the past. We had 2 revolutions in 2.5 years, and that led to, if you want, a imbalance in the security situation. But just the last week, you had an explosion in front of a police station in Mansoura. Now, that's not a demonstration. That's not a demonstration getting out of hand or the security forces roughing up a demonstrator. This is clearly a terrorist act. So I think that there is terrorism, or at least potential for terrorism. It exists. I would hope that we can contain it, because we had dealt with this in the 80s and gone beyond it, and the country started to revive itself through investment, through tourism, and that's really where we want to go inclusive for all Egyptians.
Now, the deposed President Mohamed Morsi, the international community have expressed concern, the fact that he's being detained. He's currently under investigation, but if those investigations come to naught, will he be freed? What will happen to him?
The normal Egyptian laws in normal courts will deal with the cases that exist with respect to the former president. He will not be taken to an exceptional court. If there's no evidence, he will ultimately be released. If there's evidence, the rule of law will apply to him like everybody else.
And also, you have, under Mohamed Morsi, he cut diplomatic ties with Damascus. Now, you've said that those will be under review. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Well, first of all, I said our relations with every single country in the world will be under review. I wasn't specifying Syria, but on Syria, I did say things that were different from what President Morsi said. First thing I said was that we would not promote jihad in Syria. So we're not suggesting that Egyptians go and fight in Syria, while he did suggest that in his last speech. That being said, we support a political resolution to the crisis in Syria through the Geneva process, the renewed Geneva II process. We emphasize the importance of preserving the sanctity and unity of Syrian territory. Dividing Syria into different sectors is not going to help, and it will have ramifications throughout the region. We support the Syrian revolution, and we severely condemn bloodshed against innocent civilians. That's the essence of our position today. It is a realpolitik, clear, rational position based on Egypt's national interest. It's not based on ideology.
One final question. While you're fighting this war on terror, of course, Egypt relies very much on tourism. Is it safe for people to come here to visit Egypt at the moment?
Well, as I said, I wouldn't define it at this point as a war on terror. The point I was saying is that we want to ensure that it does not have the potential to be transformed into that. In essence, statistically speaking, I think Egypt still is very, very safe in comparison to any large country around the world. But of course, perception is as important as reality, because we've had so many demonstrations and associated with that some violence. Tourists are worried. Tourism is an extremely important part of our economy, but we've also always been a hospitable country to foreigners, and to do that we need to contain the security situation. And so that takes me back to my very first point.
Okay, Foreign Minister Mr. Nabil Fahmy, thank you very much for being with us today on France 24. Thank you for watching. Please stay tuned for more news.